Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Tang from Hughes, and today, welcome to our CIO CISO Summit. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Alan Thiemann, principal at Conley, and we're going to be talking about the EU AI Act. Alan, when it comes to regulating AI, can you talk a little bit about, just at a top level, what's the problem here?
Well, in the EU, particularly, the underwriting principles that led to the decision to regulate back 3 or 4 years ago when the debate started was all about human rights charter, protecting human rights, and wanting to make sure that the use of AI didn't infringe on any one individual's rights, human rights. So the largest part of the problem in Europe has focused on making sure that the basic decisions that might be employing AI are protected from abusive practices, from bias, all of the problems that I think we all know are inherent in AI to begin with. But regulation in Europe is focused on protecting those human rights. In the US, I don't think it's quite that way. I think we don't have a national federal law yet. Things are beginning to pick up around the states, which is itself a problem we can talk about later. But the problem in the U.S., I think, is more risk-based, is trying to make sure that AI, as it might be used, can't create, like the California legislation that you and I have been talking about, catastrophic outcomes.
Can you, it seems like there's a tension here between being able to preserve innovation at the same time protecting and regulating putting appropriate boundaries and conditions. What are some principles that kind of come to mind? How do you navigate this tension?
Well, of course, innovation is automatically assumed to be one of the benefits of AI or one of the attributes of AI. And so, even in Europe, while they've developed this very finely tuned regulatory environment, they still maintain the idea that it's going to promote innovation. Um, I think a lot of folks who've really started looking under the covers of the AI Act are doubtful that innovation can go on completely unimpeded because of the layered regulatory approach that's being taken. Here in the United States, innovation is at the heart of what's going on in this California bill that we mentioned that Governor Newsom has until Monday to sign or veto. And the whole argument against the bill is that it's going to stifle innovation.
Let's talk about the EU AI Act. What does it cover?
Oh gosh, well, the EU had to go through an extensive process of analyzing exactly how to build this regulatory environment. And so the scope of it is really all encompassing. It covers all AI models. It didn't initially seem to cover generative AI quite thoroughly. And so, about halfway through the process, they added language to cover generative AI or general purpose AI, I think, as they refer to it in Europe. So it's really all encompassing. You're not going to be able to get away with arguing your AI tool, your AI system is exempt in some way. We can get into kind of the three levels of types of AI and the effective dates for those, but that's going to be the context in which any company is going to have to evaluate, what they have, what they're building.
Yeah, would you step us through what are the three types of AI that are covered in the EU AI Act?
Well, it's really just the two types. All the algorithmic models,
Okay.
AI models, and then generative AI. So there will be kind of separate pathways for different types of AI. The three categories I was talking about, it has to do with enforcement. Uh, there are a handful of AI tools that are prohibited completely
Okay.
under the act. Anything with deep fakes and uh, trying to manipulate human decision making and manipulating human activity, those are forbidden.
Okay.
So, and that, by the way, the deadline for the effective date for that prohibited category class of AI systems is February 1st, 2025. So that's coming up real soon. So if you're involved in any kind of development that could be classified as a deep fake or manipulating human activity or behavior, you really have to evaluate how well you could argue you're not going to be prohibited in Europe. The second is sort of just general AI methodology and tools, but the Act separates that into basically high risk categories and low risk categories. So, unfortunately, most of us who are evaluating AI for benefits and efficiencies in business, we tend to look at those roles, and the EU Act is pretty clear that anything to do with education, anything to do with training, anything to do with employment are automatically classified as high risk. And so the regulations, the burden for high risk AI systems is substantially higher than low risk.
A lot of where all the excitement is in terms of using AI to enhance customer experience will be covered under the high risk.
Correct. I think, I don't think this is a unintentional outcome. I think it was precisely what they intended to try to construct was a regulatory environment wherein AI systems that can impact all of these important activities that we're looking at and where we're thinking about efficiency and human resources and handling business activities and so forth and looking at those benefits and efficiencies, the EU felt that those underlying decisions are, since you're impacting an individual's education, employment, and basic use of an employment and training, uh, those activities are so considered fundamental under the Human Rights Charter in the EU that any AI system that impacts those outcomes for an individual are considered high risk.
This is not just a matter then of enhancing customer experience. All of those intimate activities to improve operational performance of a business and an enterprise is going to be impacted by this as well.
I fear that's going to happen. I mean, of course, none of this is really in play yet. The law did become effective August 1st, but that prohibited category activity prohibition doesn't begin until February 1st. The high risk, I'm sorry, generative AI has a 12-month, so next August, and then the kind of high risk categories we're talking about are 24 months.
Can you talk a little bit about what enforcement of the EU AI Act is going to look like?
Yes. Well, again, depending on what type of AI system we're talking about, um, if it's a prohibited AI system, there is no enforcement. It's barred.
Okay.
Okay. So, what's going to happen if a country decides that somebody has not accepted a prohibition that they thought was in place? If there's a challenge saying my AI system is doing this, but not creating deepfakes. Is there a mechanism in place? Not yet that I know of. I think there eventually will have to be some kind of a decision, but the likelihood, I think, is that because of the way high risk AI systems are being regulated, where you almost have to get a country national body is going to be set up to vet every AI system before it can be sold in that country. So enforcement and penalties, I'd almost tell you, don't even come into play until you get permission to sell your product in a country. And unfortunately, while the AI Act initially was conceived as being, a common law affecting all of the EU countries, that's not, in fact, what's going to take place. Every country is going to have to identify and name this body to by which any provider of an AI system, uh, manufacturer, the the entity that's building the AI system, before they can actually go sell in Germany, they're going to have to go to the German body when it's established and provide all the evidence required under the law about transparency and lack of bias and accuracy and all those pieces of the regulatory puzzle. And the national body in the country will evaluate all of that evidence and decide whether or not it meets the law and can be sold in the country. If the national body in Germany says, no, we don't think that this particular product meets the test, it can't be sold in that country. So the AI Act in Europe is essentially a product safety law for
This
that reason.
is we call it the EU AI Act, but just what you just described, this is a nation by nation implication.
The way it's going to be enforced and rolled out, yeah, that's essentially the unfortunate outcome is that for any entity, manufacturer, producer of an AI system, you want to be involved in a global marketplace, and you think, well, the EU has a law. I just have to comply with the EU uh, laws. But unfortunately, in order to actually sell that product, you're going to have to go country by country.
What do you think the marketplace consequences of these requirements are going to be?
Well, there's already been some U.S. tech uh, providers who've been saying they don't want to even market in Europe. Um, I think there's reluctance to uh, completely bind themselves to that outcome because obviously, if you're a global company, your ability to market products globally is a hallmark of your success in the world economy. Um, Nobody builds a product to say I'm going only to, Austria and Germany. Um, Everyone wants to build a product that can be used by customers throughout the world.
This sounds very similar to the cybersecurity and data privacy in the US, that we're going to very quickly have to go to the most restrictive requirements, but then even that doesn't really work over here.
No, and I think you and I have had this conversation in the past about U.S. privacy laws, and I don't personally recommend taking the most restrictive law and making that the way you do business. We're now up to 20 states in the U.S. that have privacy laws, consumer privacy laws, and if you took that approach, you probably still wouldn't be compliant in some of the states because of the differences that exist. So you can't really take give me a common way of complying with even the privacy laws. So the same problem is going to exist in the EU with the AI Act.
So when it comes to the EUAI Act, it's new, but what do you expect the US companies to do in response to this? How are they going to
Well, let me
prepare?
be clear. It's not the EU Act doesn't apply to just EU companies. So it doesn't matter where you reside. It matters where your product is going to be marketed.
Mhm.
Okay, so any U.S. company that's developing an AI system is going to have to pay attention if it intends to market globally in Europe, throughout Europe. It's going to have to pay attention to how it is developing that product today to be ready to go through the vetting regulatory burden efforts in whatever countries they elect to start trying to market the product in.
Wow. Wow. Any other thoughts or guidance in terms of how the U.S. companies here? Actually, let me ask you this question: what do you expect to happen over here on this side of the pond in response to the EU AI Act?
Well, the initial thought, I think that a lot of folks had here in the U.S. was that the EU Act would become a benchmark. But as more and more analysis of the EU law is coming online, and more people are, picking it apart to see exactly how they need to act, uh, I think the outcome in the U.S. now is, first of all, as I said at the outset, it's not human rights oriented as much as it's risk management oriented in the U.S. And so the ability for U.S. Question has been now over the last couple of years, uh, can there be federal AI legislation? And there have been efforts made. Um, the idea that even NIST would perhaps become the de facto regulator of AI in the United States through the Biden administration executive order last October. Um, while the NIST has had a lot of activity now following that to develop concepts and guidelines and guardrails around AI, that's not a federal law. And so a failure of Congress to act, and you've got all kinds of statements running around in Congress, in the Senate. They've had hearings on AI regulation, and while I don't find myself universally attracted to Ted Cruz for a lot of reasons, Ted Cruz's comment after the one hearings last fall was, "We don't know shit about AI. How would we go about trying to regulate it?" And I have to say I agree completely with that statement. Members of Congress are not individually, well schooled in technology or in the issues around the use of AI. So coming up with a regulatory system in the United States is hampered by the lack of understanding. I mean, Congress faces this problem in a plethora of areas, but this one, because of the highly technical differences and unique issues that arise with AI, if you don't know what you're really trying to regulate, to prevent, or to enhance uh, the use of a product a certain way, or to create the innovative outcomes that we talked about, it's kind of hard to come up with a regulatory pattern that can guarantee that if you don't know the details. So, in that vacuum of a lack of federal law, you started to see states doing the same thing they did with the lack of a U.S. privacy law. They're having to start thinking about regulating AI in their own right. Now, let me hasten to say that some of the privacy laws actually contain um, issues about automated decision making, which oftentimes gets confused with AI, or the definition of AI can sometimes be very broadly stated. And so people somehow begin to think that when you're making an automated decision about somebody, um, let's use employment as a good one, because the New York City AI regulations cover only employment, pre-employment tests and things that an employer would use to figure out who might be the best fit in their company, or to narrow the pool. If you've got one job and you've got 1,000 applicants, you can't sit there and interview 1,000 people. You have to find a mechanism to reduce that number, the pool, down to a manageable number. And so a lot of tests here in the United States that are built by psychometric measurement companies are able to do a lot of that pre-screening, but the state laws and the New York City regulation have complicated that, because they tend to look at any kind of an automated decision-making tool as being AI and therefore violating your rights as a person. But, you know, a person's rights don't include the right to a specific job, especially when, like I said in the hypothetical I raised, if you've got 1,000 people applying for one job, by definition, 999 of them are not going to get that job. So it's very difficult, I think, in the United States to wrestle with risk analysis about AI systems. But NIST did put out in January 23 the AI risk management framework. Probably many of your audience are familiar with the NIST cybersecurity framework or the NIST privacy framework. Unhappily, the AI management framework is not constructed and built the same way that the cybersecurity and privacy frameworks are, where you have a very solid list of control points that a company can evaluate where they are in complying with that particular control. For the AI risk management framework, it was 7 guiding principles. And what this said they thought they were going to do, which they haven't yet done any of, was to augment that 7 very high level principles with individual industry profiles that they were sort of inviting people to do. I personally been involved in trying to develop 3 or 4 of those and submitted one of them, and nothing has been done with it. So the ability for NIST to provide guidance beyond the 7 guiding principles, transparency and lack of bias and so forth, the normal things you think you have to meet are there and stated, but real guidance to a company and how to go about measuring whether their system is or is not complying requires more detail. The NIST hasn't provided it. The federal government hasn't provided it. So the states are now trying to figure out how to provide that kind of insight and direct guidance. And there are a couple states that I'd call particular attention to. The first one is Colorado. They've already passed a law. It doesn't go into effect until February of 2026. So you have some time to evaluate what you need to do. The Colorado AI Act is actually very similar to the EU law in terms of evaluating decisions like employment and education and training as being a high risk. And so I think Colorado has followed a little bit of that benchmark idea that we talked about. There's a law currently pending that was passed by the California legislature back in August. It's sitting on Governor Newsom's desk, and he has to make a decision by Monday whether or not he's going to sign it or veto it. And it's drawing an intense amount of controversy. The big tech companies, many of them have said, with a few exceptions, have said it's going to stifle innovation. It's going to create a funding problem for startups. It's really got a serious impact down the road. Now, this only applies to major AI systems, $100 million or more, basically the test. But if you are building a system that can have that kind of pervasive impact on an economy, and by the way, the California law and the Colorado law do not apply just to companies in those states. They apply if your AI tool, is going to be used with citizens and residents of those states.
Wow.
Okay, so it doesn't matter where you are in the United States. And again, unless your business model is very different than I think most of your audience is going to be, you're not looking at how do I build a product I can market in 1 or 2 states. You're looking at how do I build a product, particularly in this technical arena, where I can sell this product universally around the country and around the world. So California is potentially going to create an even broader problem while it is somewhat limited in terms of the size of the AI system, you would have to, if you're building one of those systems, you would have to build in a human-controlled kill switch to avoid the potential of that AI system having some sort of catastrophic effect. So, I mean, that's way beyond anything I've seen anywhere else. But there are those in the community who think that, yes, the abuses of AI can be that severe. I mean, you can read any number of different articles about the potential for AI to take away jobs and take away, any reason for humans to be in control, that the machines are going to control everything. If that mentality is going to give rise to a regulatory outcome, the California law is a pretty good example of we're not going to allow the potential for an AI system to have that kind of dramatic impact.
This is a classic issue of we've got very specific concerns that we want to protect the citizens against, and yet at the same time, you have a solution, a product, a technology that is continuing to evolve at an accelerated pace, and you're trying to put rules to govern its use and its application.
And that's one of the other complaints about the California law, that it's really premature.
Yeah.
Um, that it is not ready for prime time yet, but we don't know all the impacts and all the ways that AI systems are going to operate and be controlled. So, because of those uncertainties, but then on the other hand, there are the proponents of the California law say, but if you don't sign this law, Governor, there are no rules. And so it's a wild, wild west, free time for any AI system to run amok, and for any developer of an AI system to have free reign in doing anything they want to do. So the problems of regulation are very much on the forefront of everyone's mind as we look at what Governor Newsom is going to do. They're, I think, not a great prognosticator, but I think the argument that seems to be winning the day in quite a few circles is if you don't regulate at all, you leave the landscape completely free.
We are clearly in the very beginnings
Yeah,
of.
and the comment that people make in the same vein is, well, if you sign this bill into law, all of those companies that are adversely affected by it are going to come into the California legislature next year, as Anthropic did this last year, and try to make changes. And the legislature listened to a lot of those changes. But OpenAI did not come in and make any suggested changes. Um, Most U.S. businesses did not. I know the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has sent a letter to Governor Newsom strongly opposing the bill because of the stifling innovation and funding issues. So it's very, I won't say evenly split, but there are clearly a number of advocates on either side of the outcome here to sign it or veto it.
Wow. Alan, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Everyone, I've been speaking with Alan Thiemann, a principal at Conley Rose, and we've been talking about the impact the EU AI Act is going to have on Europe and the rest of the world.